Hello there. I am glad you can make it today. We've got a story about Jesus that's going to follow in on a couple of stories we've already heard. And what I want to start off with is that you may remember that John the Baptist, as we talked about him, had died at one point. He was actually killed through the actions of one of the Herods. And Jesus, being a relative of John's, it was kind of upsetting for him. Second thing is that Jesus had sent out his disciples on a special mission, and they were given the power to heal people, to drive out unclean spirits, and a few other things while they were going to teach about God. So they come back to Jesus. They're tired from their labor. Jesus is upset about his relative, his cousin, being killed, and he tells them we need to go to a remote place and rest. Of course, with Jesus, that also meant time praying. So they're in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. They move across part of the lake, come to a remote area. It doesn't stay that way very long because now word of Jesus and things he can do has gotten out, and people are looking for him constantly. Well, they show up. Of course, he and his disciples are wanting to rest, and Jesus just can't do that now because he sees people in need, people who need to be healed, and especially people who need to hear about God. So he starts teaching them, and it's pretty similar to what he was doing in a lot of places where he would go out and talk about what God wanted. Starts getting late in the day, and the disciples start telling him, okay, you need to dismiss the people because we're in a remote area. They need to be able to go and find a place to stay and find food to buy. Well, Jesus tells them, uh, you feed them. Well, that's a little bit of a tough thing for them to do. Philip is there and he says, Lord, you know, we would have to have 200 denarii to give each one of them a bite to eat. Well, a couple of things about that. 200 denarii, uh, denarii is a unit of money, kind of like we have dollars now. They had denarii then. And one denarii is what you would get from working all day long. So it would take you about 8 months to build up the amount of money that Philip saw needed to be spent just to buy the bread for the people to have a little bit to eat. Now, the number of people is what makes this such a big deal. There are 5,000 men. Now, there are also women and children. Those weren't counted, but in that day, families tended to have a lot of children. And so I've seen estimates of anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 people who were there. So it's a huge number of people. They don't have food to feed them, and apparently they don't have enough money to buy food to feed them. And even if they did, where would they go? So this is a little bit of a problem. And we see there's something I had not known before I was reading over it today and realized that the disciples had just been out and doing miracles, doing great works in the name of God from power Jesus had given them, and yet they don't think about that when they're told to feed the people. They're thinking about it from a human standpoint and from people who have limitations. So this is a great time for the disciples to learn something as well as the message that the people were getting. Well, Andrew finds this boy who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. Now, when we think of a loaf of bread, we're thinking of something, you know, maybe this big, this long, and comes in a bag. Their bread was different. When they thought of loaves, it's more like thinking of a biscuit, something maybe the size of your fist. Um, so not a whole lot of bread, and it's barley, which you could eat, but was generally considered a poor person's food because it just didn't taste as good as wheat bread. And I guess it was easier to grow, but it was considered something that you wouldn't eat unless you just had to. Well, a lot of people were in that condition that they had to. That's what this little boy had. Now, the fish would have been dried or somehow preserved, maybe pickled even. But we're not talking about huge fish. We're talking about something like sardines. Here's a can I've got of sardines, and this probably contains about 20 fish in here. So you think just two of these fish, and that's about what you've got. Because for this boy, it was to be his meal and enough for him, but not a whole lot extra. So as the disciples are trying to determine what to do, they've got this little bit of food, and Jesus tells the disciples, "Okay, go have the people sit down." And he has them line up by 50s and 100s, and I think that's more of a way so that people could sit in order and be easy to distribute food. Well, disciples are still wondering, okay, what kind of food are you going to slice this bread extra thin? No, Jesus prays over it. He thanks God for the food, and the food multiplies. Um, the only way you can account for this is that it was a miracle. It was something through God's power. Now, what we're reminded of is back in the days of Moses when the people were in the wilderness and God would rain down manna upon the people and provide food for them. And this is something kind of like that. Um, in this case, they go ahead, they spread out or start handing out the food, and it's enough for everybody. In fact, there's so much food that there are leftovers, and they fill 12 baskets with them. And one of the things I was reading about the baskets is that each person in that time would carry a basket, and that would just sort of make sense. That's probably what the little boy had his meal in, and people would use that for shopping, or if they were going into an area where they weren't sure there was going to be enough food or enough of anything, they would carry that. So kind of like having a bag to carry your things. That makes sense. So now it's really the end of the day. Jesus puts his disciples into a boat, and I'd always thought that they were the only ones in the boat, but it's possible that there could have been other passengers or even a couple of sailors to get the boat out there, even though it was not necessary because Jesus had at least four disciples who were fishermen and knew how to handle a boat. So he sends them off. He speaks to the crowd a little bit more, and now he dismisses them. That's kind of wrapping it up, saying, okay, I'm finished speaking for the day, so you may want to go back to your homes or find a place to stay. Now, Jesus is able to go up on the mountain or one of the hills, is another way to think of it, and get his prayer time. That time he's been needing since he heard that John the Baptist died. Well, he's up there a while, and it's high enough that he can see the boat with his disciples on the lake. And he's told them where to go, but they're having trouble because there are headwinds against them. They're having to row and are not able to use sails at all. And trying to row in the water and with the wind pushing against them, they're struggling. They're not moving very fast at all. And they've been at it for hours by the time Jesus heads down from where he is and does something that gets their attention. They're in the boat and they look and they see Jesus walking on the water, looking like he's going to go past them. Well, they've never seen that. Of course, we've never seen that. They don't expect that, and they think it's a spirit of some sort, and they're frightened by it. And you think, wait, how can they see him? Because it's nighttime. We're talking, this is between like 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So they've been out here all night long. It's still dark. How did they see him? Well, this was not a stormy night. This was a windy night. So The starlight was available and possibly the moonlight as well. So they were able to see things, although surely it was not as clear as it would have been in broad daylight. So they see Jesus heading by, and he calls out to them, "Don't be afraid, it is I." Now, that's another way of saying the phrase, "I am," which, going back to the Old Testament time, again, when we're thinking about Moses and the burning bush, he asks God his name, and God says, "I am who I am." So when Jesus says that, that's one more thing besides the feeding of so many people that is telling his disciples that, okay, this is God in human form. Well, Peter reacts in a way that you go, well, yeah, that's Peter. He says, "Lord, if it's really you, call me to come out to you." And Jesus says, "Come on." So Peter steps out of the boat and he starts to walk, but he gets distracted by the waves and the wind and gets scared and he starts sinking and calls out to Jesus to save him, which Jesus does. And Jesus, you know, has to tell Peter again, "Ah, oh, your faith was so weak." Letting him know that while um, Peter had faith, great things could happen. When Peter didn't have faith, the great things wouldn't happen, or at least not to the same degree. Well, they get on into the boat and are immediately at the shore, where um, not where they were heading, but where they were close to, because the winds had driven the boat off course. And where they came ashore, it's about daytime. People start showing up, and Jesus has something to say to them that sounds kind of mean at first, but it makes a lot of sense. And some of the people are showing up because they want to be healed, and he's glad to heal those. Other people are showing up and saying, "Oh, where have you been? We didn't know you were coming here." And he's telling them, "Oh, you're just following me because you were fed. Um, you need to pay much more attention to the food that keeps your soul alive, the, the, the food of the Word of God that comes to you and lives in you and sustains you. That's much more important than normal kind of food that you eat and have to eat every day." So there's a lot of lessons for a lot of people in this one. Um, the people who are there to see Jesus and want to hear what he has to say, he will go to great lengths to reach them. The people who are looking to make him a king, and that's what it is with some of these people who were there, um, he doesn't really have time for them. He's not into um, going along with a plan other people have for him. His plan is to follow God, to teach people about the kingdom of God, which is much bigger than any earthly kingdom. Okay, with that, I am going to leave you. I will show you my tie. Um, it's goofy with a lot of food. Obviously, this is not the same kind of food that the people were having then, but this is more of what it will look like after they were finished, not at the beginning when they would have just had the few bits of bread and fish. So, hope you'll be back next time and see you then. Bye.